Hey everyone, it's me, Beau, back once again with another cult movie review. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing the 70s cult classic, The Driller Killer. If of course you like the content that I do, please consider subscribing. It helps me continue to grow the channel. So some of the long-term viewers of this channel will already know that I'm a huge fan of the director Abel Ferrara. I've reviewed a few of his films already on this channel, and this was another one, The Driller Killer, that I'd been meaning to get to. So The Driller Killer was this low-budget slasher film from 1979. It was directed by the legendary Abel Ferrara and was written by Nicholas St. John. The movie was independently produced and featured a cast of completely unknown actors. The musician and Abel's long-term collaborator, Joe Delia, was also tasked to produce the soundtrack. Now, upon its release, the film was initially banned here in the UK due to its excessive violence by the incompetent BBFC classification board. Then, subsequently, years later, it was released with cuts in 1999 and then subsequently re-released completely uncut in 2002. And it was, years ago, I'd say maybe around 2004, 2005, that I actually picked up a box set that contained The Driller Killer. I think it was Anchor Bay that had put together this kind of horror collection. And I saw it and was kind of taken back by some of the crazy imagery that I saw. And as well, at the time, I was kind of getting into films and cinema, so I was completely unaware of who Abel Ferrara was and what work he produced. So the story followed the character Reno Miller, played by director Abel Ferrara, under the pseudonym Jimmy Lane. Miller was this struggling artist who was living in this grotty Manhattan apartment with his girlfriend Carol, played by Carolyn Mars, and her drug-addled lover, so to speak, Pamela, played by actress Baby Day. Reno was short on money, depressed, and had trouble completing his latest art piece. Things only got worse for the character when a punk band called the Roosters moved in and started rehearsing all day and night, making Reno's life unbearable. Very quickly, the music that this band was making became a major issue and prevented Reno meeting the deadline for his art project. The stress and frustration that Reno felt slowly chipped away at his mental state. Things came to a head when Reno's art piece was reviewed by his boss, who rejected the piece outright. It would seem that the rejection was the final switch needed for Reno to completely turn psychotic. One night, after seeing a commercial on TV about a portable electric drill, Reno's sick fascinations began. This led him to commit a series of murders on the streets of New York, specifically targeting the homeless and the drunk. Once the killings began, we saw this grotesque, violent side of Reno emerge. And I have to say, the whole attacking vulnerable people on the streets while they slept did seem very mean-spirited. I mean, that whole thing actually reminded me of a scene from another Abel Ferrara film called The Addiction from 1995, another movie that I've reviewed on this channel. In the movie, we saw a woman inject drugs into a homeless man while he slept. Some very dark imagery in that film and in The Driller Killer. On the whole, The Driller Killer is a film that followed a man and his descent into madness. The Reno Miller character, played by Abel Ferrara, was clearly a mentally ill person in need of some serious psychological help. But he never got that. He never got the support he truly needed And so Reno went unchecked, undiagnosed, and remained unwell. Not only was he going out on the streets, murdering homeless people, but he was also trying to maintain a relationship with his girlfriend, Carol, while she was involved with her lover, Pamela. Looking closer at their dysfunctional relationship, the threesome, as it were, it seemed to me that Reno's killing spree acted as some sort of reaction to this pent-up sexual inadequacies he felt about himself. And I say that because of a few things. Notice how all of Reno's victims were men. And yes, while the homeless population was disproportionately male back then, I saw the killings as this cathartic ritual Reno was playing out in his manic state. In his twisted mind, he was unable to fulfill the duties as a man towards his girlfriend, Carol. He wasn't enough for her, and so he took the rage out on the vulnerable men sleeping outside his building. In this crazed state that Reno was in, he saw himself as a loser, as someone that wasn't going to accomplish anything, and he was neglected just like those neglected the homeless out on the streets of New York. Reno had this built-in self-hatred for himself that was now coming out through these random murders he was committing. And in some ways, Reno saw himself in them, and he wanted them destroyed. Maybe I'm basing too much importance on the killings, but it just seemed obvious that there was more to it than just a bunch of random murders. And, you have to be aware that the over-the-top, gory exploitation that we saw, the excessive violence, that was there to distract the viewer from seeing Reno's inner horrors that he was experiencing. Not only was it violent on the streets of New York with this guy, Miss Maniac with a drill, but it was a very violent world in the mind of Reno Miller. Abel Ferrara has always had a good eye for location shooting in his films, and Driller Killer is no exception. The grimy ugliness of the urban streets depicted on screen portrayed New York at its very worst. This is not a place that you'd want to visit anytime soon. The film had this really sleazy look and feel to it, but it fit perfectly with the bohemian characters that we followed. Now I have to mention the acting of Abel Ferrara here for a moment. Of course, he's first and foremost a director, but credit where credit's due. He fully committed to the role. Taking into account the story of the Driller Killer, taking into account the Reno character and the lifestyle that he was living, the whole exploitational nature of it all, I thought Abel did a great job. I think he's better served as a director, and I'm glad he pursued that. But with all things considered, Abel's performance was more than passable. It did feel believable that a guy like Reno could possibly carry out such heinous acts. And I guess it wasn't too much of a stretch for Abel Ferrara to portray a struggling artist, because, in reality, that's what he was at the time. He bet on himself that he could pull off the role, and he did, so great job. And so, dislikes for The Driller Killer, 1979. My main dislike for this film would be the simple fact that there's not really any characters that are likable in this film. There's no one that you can really get behind or root for. The characters just didn't seem very friendly. In fairness, the world that Abel Ferrara created in The Driller Killer, it seemed like a very unfriendly New York. It didn't seem like a very, as I said, a place that you want to visit anytime soon. It felt hostile, and you saw that kind of through the actions of Reno. I don't know. I guess you could have maybe felt sympathy for the Reno character because clearly he was mentally unstable. In some ways, the state neglected him like they still do to so many others in real life. In other words, there wasn't much difference between Reno and the people he killed. I mean, it could be argued that Reno was a victim of sorts, but of course that still doesn't condone his violent behaviour. He wasn't serving poetic justice on the streets of New York. And so, as a viewer, you're left with this bleak, low-budget film that is filled with simplistic, shallow characters and gory death scenes. Now, I will cut Ferrara some slack here, given the very limited budget he was working with. I mean, the film had no backing, it was independently made, there was little money to spend on actors and script rewrites. You know, he and his team did the best they could with the resources they had at their disposal. Though, with all of that said, maybe Ferrara should have taken more time to work on the movie's script and character development with the writer Nicholas St. John before going into production. And so, ratings for The Driller Killer. I'm going to be rating this movie a solid 5 out of 10. The Driller Killer is this gritty piece of American cinema with its unique tone and visuals. The film's amateurish charm and handheld camera work helped to create a strong sense of realism, making the violence seem all that more shocking. Abel Ferrara focused on what he did have and accentuated the positives. In addition, he worked on his strengths and hid his weaknesses. You know, the film had this weird kind of atmosphere which I did actually think worked in its favour. I viewed the raw editing, you know, the soundtrack and just the whole kind of unpolished nature of the film as a representation of Reno's unsteady mindset. Don't forget, the character was already having these scary hallucinations. We as an audience were just seeing the story unfold through the eyes of Reno. You know, some may consider this movie a horror slasher flick, but it's really more a gruesome character study of a young guy plunging into the depths of madness. In some ways, the movie was an attempt at mixing art house sensibilities with the horror exploitation genre. The film also highlighted the homeless epidemic that New York was and still is facing today. So yes, this is a film from over 40 years ago now, and it still holds relevance here in the 21st century. All the underground and punk aesthetic that was implemented into the film felt entirely genuine and added a lot of character to the movie's overall experience. The film really was this unique, raw, unapologetic, violent tragedy played out on screen. Even though this film does have its haters, I kind of think that the movie had enough creativity to disguise the film's lesser qualities. Now, I take many people watching this review would have already seen The Driller Killer. But if you haven't, or if it's been a while, I'd go give it a watch. It's definitely worth revisiting, especially if you're an Abel Ferrara fan. And in terms of Abel Ferrara's films, where does it rank? I mean, this was an early film for Abel Ferrara. I mean, his first real proper production. And yeah, I mean, you have to take into account all the issues and restrictions that he was facing. For what it's worth, I think he did a great job. And even though the film isn't necessarily a masterpiece, it's hard enough to make films, let alone when you've got, you know, very little money. So the more I kind of take a step back and take all the, everything into account, the whole context, it was actually quite an accomplishment for Abel to pull off. So, yeah, definitely an interesting piece, the cinema. Well, that's all from me today, guys, in this review. Hope you have enjoyed it. I will be back very soon with more reviews. Don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, of course, take care.